is there anything different involved in planning for women than for men? Well, here to talk with me about this is Dana Onspa, Kathy Mealy, and Nancy Fellinger, all from Sensible Money. Welcome.
Hi, Bob.
Hey, Bob.
So, Dana, where to begin? Is there anything different?
You know, every time this question comes up, the first thing that comes to my mind is it's very similar, whether you're, planning for men or planning for women, whether they're single or they're married. The financial principles that you need to apply are similar in the modeling process and how you plan for the future. I think this topic comes up a lot because in the past, there's this sense that women have been reluctant to seek advice. Maybe they feel like they don't know enough yet, so they're intimidated by coming to talk to someone. We were actually all talking about this the other day, and Nancy had some really interesting thoughts on some of the things the industry is doing to appeal to women, to make them feel comfortable, some of which she thought were good and others not so. Nancy, you want to share some of what you were thinking?
Yeah, sure. So Dana, I don't think the numbers have really moved a whole lot in the last, couple of decades or so. Women only make up about 20% of the advisory force. So right there are not a lot of women financial advisors, financial planners. And the industry got kind of a wake-up call a number of years ago where some studies had been done. Notably, I believe the Boston Consulting Group was one of the first, but there have been a number of studies that show that somewhere between, say, 70%, 80% of women will change advisors upon becoming divorced or widowed. And so that was a wake-up call for the industry. Like, you're all of a sudden you're losing clients because women have not felt paid attention to or treated particularly well. And so that has led to a lot of effort on the part of the advisory industry to try to be more appealing to women, more attractive to women. And as part of that, there's this sort of sense that, women are a market, which I just always makes me cringe. Women are not a market. Men are not a market. There are different ways to segment markets, but not by gender. So anyway, as part of that, in terms of appealing to women, there's been a lot of effort to make offices more attractive, to make marketing materials more attractive, and one of the big things is using a lot of pink and trying to make materials that appeal to women, flowery and so forth. And that's really not what women are looking for. Women are looking for good advice. They're looking to be listened to, understood, and to have services delivered in a way that is understandable. That's kind of like what men want too. But anyway, that's sort of an observation of what's been going on.
Yeah. So there's been this perception that, at least with couples, that men have always been the primary financial decision maker. Kathy, what happens? What's your experience been with respect to who is the primary financial decision maker?
Yeah, we work with a lot of couples, and one person tends to be more the primary decision maker or handles the finances more often. And so although we may have more meetings with that person, and it tends to be the male more than the female, we encourage the females, the wives, to be on the calls as well. We want to be able to build a relationship with them, so not to go into a lot of the details if they don't want to hear it, but have them comfortable if something comes up that they can give us a call at any time.
Yeah. So do you have a story to share about that?
Yes. Yeah. This had just happened the end of last year. I was working with the couple, Susan and Peter, and Peter was the main financial person, and I had most of my meetings with Peter, and we would encourage Susan to be on the calls. And again, she would be the first one to tell us, I don't want to know all about the details, Kathy. But why we asked her to be on the call was so that we would build this relationship and she'd feel comfortable to call out. And what happened was last fall, I tried to reach out to Peter a couple of times and couldn't get a hold of him. And so I called Susan, and she told me that he had just had a stroke. And what she asked me, the next two questions, was very telling. She said, are you paying my bills? Who's paying my bills? And why do I have so much money in my checking account? And so from that, I had been working with Peter, and we had been transferring money monthly over because they were going to be doing some home projects. And when I shared this with her, she's like, oh, yes, all right, I remember that. And when we also talked about, the bills, I said, is there anyone, that's close to you that can help you out? And her daughter was coming, her adult daughter was coming to visit, and we ended up working together, and everything worked out well. But it was because she felt comfortable talking to me, I think, that we'd be able to work through all of these together.
Nancy, you must have some stories and anecdotes to share as well.
Yeah, I would echo what Kathy said. Very oftentimes there's one person who's more involved. And again, I go back to women have, just a generalization, but there's so many anecdotal stories. Women have not felt particularly welcome in the conversations or engaged in the conversations. I've actually had experiences where I've seen other advisors when speaking to the woman actually raise their voices, like it's like, no, she can hear you. It's not, she can understand. Speaking louder is not going to make it more understandable, right? So, but there's usually one party who may be less involved, and it's really important that both people are able to fully participate. And sometimes it just means communicating differently throughout the course of the conversation with one or another, and checking in to make sure that everyone's on the same page. A specific story doesn't come to mind at the moment, but yeah, we've certainly had those experiences.
Yeah. I mean, given that at least with couples that husbands tend to predecease their wives, and there must be some concern about women becoming the surviving spouse and what they might need to survive after the death of the spouse. Absolutely.
Yep. And I think for both men and for women who wind up as the surviving spouse, but particularly for women with potentially longer life expectancies, the question becomes, who's going to take care of me? How, who am I going to rely on? Is family nearby? Who am I going to stay with? Who am I going to be able to, to call on?
Yeah. Dana, I'm sure you have some stories to share as well.
Yeah, I do. Particularly as we're talking about surviving spouses, I have several clients who are on both sides, widows and widowers. But I have worked with several widows, and one of the things we've been able to help with is their Social Security claiming strategy. So there is a claiming strategy that is available to a surviving spouse that is not available in any other circumstance. And so as an example, I have a client, I'll call her Lisa. Her ex-husband had passed away. She had been married to him for over 10 years. And so she was able to start claiming a survivor benefit, a monthly survivor benefit based on his earnings record. And she was able to start doing that. Her full retirement age was 66. And now this year she called me back. She just turned 70. And so she's able to switch over to her own benefit, which continued to grow in the background, but through something called delayed retirement credits. And so by using this strategy, she was able to get more out of her cumulative Social Security benefits. And it's only available if you are a surviving spouse, or even on an ex-spouse if you were married to them for at least 10 years.
So we're now in an age where many, especially older couples, are getting divorced and in some cases getting remarried. What do women need to know about getting remarried and financial planning and retirement planning?
Yeah, well, back to Social Security, I have had two situations now where we advised a woman not to get remarried. She was in a serious relationship. We're talking about marriage, and we said, wait until after age 60. So because of this ability to claim a spousal or a survivor benefit on an ex-spouse, it applied in both of these situations. And we said, look, if you wait until after 60 to get remarried, you will be able to use this strategy. If you get remarried before age 60, you will not. So there's another issue where Social Security claiming comes into account when you're thinking about the timing of marriage. It also comes into play with pension benefit claiming. And I know Kathy had a situation recently where she saw that firsthand. Kathy?
Yeah, absolutely. The couple came to us, and the husband had already been retired. He was receiving 3 different pensions, and we worked through it. They said they were 100% survivor, and out of the blue, unfortunately, he passed away. And so when, call it Tina, went to go get the survivor benefits, she found out that one was actually no benefit whatsoever, and one was half of what she thought it was going to be. And so they went from an overfunded plan to a constrained plan because of this. And so the takeaway from this is when you do have a pension and you do have that option for survivors, is to really be thoughtful of it and to think through your plan. The good news is we were able to work together. I went through some questions with her, and she had the confidence to go back and ask more questions. And she actually did get something from the one that she didn't think she was going to be able to get anything from. So it turned out, but it is to be able to think about what type of options that you have when you take that.
Yeah. Nancy, there's a lot of fear on the part of folks who are transitioning into retirement. What do you encounter there?
One of the things that I don't think gets talked about enough is just the sort of the emotional and the psychological aspects of retiring. And one of my colleagues from many, many years ago used to love to say, I married you for better or for worse, but not for lunch every day. And he was referring to a lot of the executives that he worked with, men largely. And all of a sudden they would retire, and now they were home. And they, wanted to be helpful, and they got involved in projects. Well, they were kind of in their spouse's turf there. So that can create some tension. So going into retirement, thinking about how are we going to do this relationship wise? What kinds of things are we going to do together? What kind of things are we going to do with our friends individually or by ourselves? I look at my own situation where, my husband and I have been married 31 years now. And he has always said that he works to live and I live to work. So I don't see myself, at some point I will retire. There's a runway there. There's a sell by date, but I don't see myself ever retired, and he would be retired tomorrow. So talking about those kinds of things, I think is really, is really important. And I know Dana's had some other conversations along those lines with people.
Yeah, I have. And it's interesting. I do think things are changing. We're talking a lot about the traditional role models where we see, we have a partner here in the firm, Amy, and she is the primary breadwinner in her house. And they have chosen that her husband is a stay-at-home dad. So I think we have to be aware that those role models are changing and what's acceptable is changing. And, I think it's fantastic. It's awesome. But going back to the traditional kind of role models, I've certainly had clients retire who experienced that. I've heard that saying before, Nancy, I married you for better or worse, but not for lunch every day. I've had clients say it to me before as they were trying to navigate this new part of their life. But I also have had clients that successfully navigated it. I had one story, I'll call her Patty, and her husband retired first. And so it was several years that she kept working. She wanted to work to 65 to get to Medicare coverage, and there were some other benefits her company provided. They thought it would be useful in their financial plan for her to keep working. And so he took over all the grocery shopping, the meal prep, the laundry, and she was just in awe. She described it as wonderful. And so I think being able to talk about that and figure out how the roles are going to change if you're in a staggered retirement situation, can be really useful. And then figuring out what is it you are retiring to. As Nancy just said, I'm like Nancy. It's hard for me to picture traditional retirement, but what are you going to do with your time? What are the hobbies you're each going to engage in? How are some of those going to overlap, and which ones are you going to do separately? I think those things are super important.
Yeah. How important, we've talked about Social Security claiming, pension claiming, et cetera. How important is it to have an advocate in your corner as you go through some of these decisions?
A lot of what we have been talking about, I think, is advocacy. Kathy's story in terms of the woman whose husband passed away and the pension benefit, by having someone there to say, hey, go back and ask these questions, that was a form of advocacy. And I have a story that still is just incredible to me. A woman was referred to me after her husband had passed away. Her CPA referred her, and they had a big art collection, actually valued at over $4 million. And they had a family friend who bought this art from her after her husband had passed for $4 million on an installment sale. So they were paying her $25,000 a month. That's a good chunk of money. And it was the bulk of her wealth was right there. And the person that bought it made payments for 1 year and defaulted. And so no more payments coming in. Now, she was in her late 70s at the time, and it took me almost 2 years to convince her to meet with an attorney and pursue litigation. So finally she did. I was able to introduce her to an attorney, and they ended up getting back $1.5 million. Later in life, in her mid 80s, she needed long-term care. Now she had the money to pay for it. So in that case, having an advocate, someone there is saying, look, I know this was a family friend, or so you thought, but you need to pursue litigation. You have to do this. And again, 2 years of me standing there on her side, encouraging her. So advocacy is super important, and someone that you can listen to and be there to help encourage you to do what needs to be done.
So we've talked about women as part of a couple. What about women who have never been married? What advice, guidance do you have for them?
Kathy, I think you had some thoughts on Social Security.
Absolutely. Yeah. Social Security again. And a lot of times I work with a lot of single women, and it seems to be the tendency for them to want to take Social Security early. It's not that guaranteed income that they want. And by talking through and explaining the different benefits and why it may be better for them to wait, then they're able to see why a decision may be made one way or another, but then they can see the options there. So I think that's what's really important, is to be what you were just saying, Dana, is to be able to explain things with people and not just say this is the way it should be done. And it gives them they feel more comfortable making a decision. Nancy, you had someone too, didn't you?
Well, one of the primary considerations is the longer life expectancy, potentially. So when we're doing, planning, you could have a situation where there's a guy with one set of circumstances, a woman with another. They're very similar, but when we tack on another 5 years of potential lifespan, but also the potential for long-term care, which can be pretty costly. It's a very different sort of picture. So that's one of the things that we really have to pay very close attention to. And it goes back to the, who's going to take care of me? There can be a sort of a rapid deceleration of capabilities as we get closer to the end of our lives. And, and it's a real thing. Like my friends are all getting older, so who do I rely on? So that's big. Whether it's long-term care insurance, whatever it is, there has to be, and it's good to start preparing early. There has to be a long-term care plan. Like, where are you going to be, with whom, how, all those kinds of things. That applies to men and women, but again, tacking on those extra years for women's life expectancy it absolutely makes a difference.
Yeah, it does. And as you said, there has to be a plan. I think that comes back to the importance of having an advisory team. We talked about advocacy, but one of the differences for single women, when you're married, you have someone you're constantly bouncing ideas off of. They have different experiences, a different set of knowledge they're bringing to the decision-making process. And so when you are single, you need to recreate that. Who are the people you are going to bounce ideas off? Who are you going to consult with before making important decisions? Sometimes just having that person that you're talking through the decisions with. I don't know, I know all of us actually, at times you're talking through something out loud and the person you're talking to never says a word. And at the end you go, thanks for helping me figure that out. So you need that advisory team there that you're going to consult with.
Yeah. So we touched on remarriage a little bit, but other things that you encounter with late in life divorce?
Oh, late in life divorce. I have 3 words: mediation, mediation, mediation. I have had clients get divorced, and I'll consider late in life, we'll say 55 or older, who went the attorney route. And in my opinion, it just cost everyone more money. So there's only so much in assets. And now you have to support 2 households with those same assets. In most cases, the primary residence does have to be sold, and people have to end up finding 2 smaller residences. And so when you go the legal battle and start hashing it out, it just costs more. And now there's less in the pot to support the 2 households. So if you can get through it with mediation, that is my advice. On the positive side, I had a case recently. They went through a divorce shortly after retirement. It might be back to, I married you for better or for worse, but not for lunch every day. But it was only a few months after retirement. And she thought that she would not be able to keep a house that they had just bought. She didn't think she would have the income to be able to refinance it. We were actually able to work with a mortgage broker and set up monthly distributions from her IRA that allowed her to qualify for the mortgage. And so that was a nice surprise throughout it. But they did go through mediation. They didn't battle it out, and that helped them both have a better outcome.
Yeah. All right. So we've covered a lot of ground. Before we wrap up, I'm curious if each of you could, if there's 1 or 2 things that people who watch this video should remember, what would it be?
Plan. Don't be afraid to look at the numbers. A lot of people, I think, don't, because they're afraid. And I think this is maybe, I've heard this more from women over the years than men. They're afraid of what they're going to find out. And that's not a good place to be. Get a plan, have a plan, understand what you have, understand how it can be sustainable, make good decisions, work with an interested, investment or advisory partner.
Yep. I would echo that. Absolutely, Nancy. I would say find someone that you're comfortable with and that you can ask questions. I think that's one of the most important things, is you don't have to understand every little fact and figure on here, on your plan, but just feel comfortable asking and knowing that somebody's in your corner.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I would add, if you haven't talked to an advisor, but you've thought about it, just start the process. You don't have to hire the first person you talk to. So it can be easy to be intimidated. I know when I was younger and having to hire my first accountant or attorney, it did seem intimidating. And so, what helps is you're in the driver's seat. You are hiring this person. So think of yourself as the employer and ask questions. Do you like them? Do you understand them? Do they communicate in a way that you can relate to? And if the answer is no, move on. So look at the interview process as part of your education, and don't feel any kind of pressure. I mean, if someone's putting pressure on you to buy a product or hire them immediately, that's probably not the right person for you. Keep interviewing till you find someone you feel is really on your side.
Yeah. Well, Dana, Kathy, Nancy, want to thank you for sharing your knowledge and wisdom with our viewers. It's greatly appreciated.